Sveiki, aš žurnalistė Eglė Krištopaitytė.
O žurnalistas Gintaras Radauskas ir čia laida Kompasas.
Šiandien, balandžio 28-ąją, sukanka lygiai 100 dienų nuo Jungtinių valstijų prezidento Joe Bideno inauguracijos.
Kaip sekasi demokratų įvykdyti savo vidaus politikos programą? Skelbiamos skambios iniciatyvos dėl kovos su klimato kaita, norima keisti mokesčių sistemą, be abejo stengiamasi suvaldyti ir koronaviruso pandemiją. O pernai per rinkimų kampaniją daug kalbėta apie sisteminio rasizmo problemą.
Kalbėdamas apie Jungtinių valstijų užsienio politiką, Bidenas skelbė, kad Amerika sugrįžo. Jis taip pat žadėjo griežtą poziciją Rusijos ir Kinijos atžvilgiu.
Kaip jam pavyko laikytis pažadų? Ir ką apie Bideno darbą galvoja opozicijoje šiuo metu dirbantis respublikonai? Pirmiausia, kalbamės apie vidaus politiką su Hamline'o universiteto JAV Minesotos Valstijoje teisės profesoriumi Davidu Schultzu.
Well, the first 100 days, I think, have been not bad for Joe Biden's presidency. When he took office, he said he had three priorities. Priority one was to address the pandemic in the United States. The second issue was going to be to address the economic issues flowing from the pandemic. And third, and we'll talk about it in a few minutes here, is to restore U.S. global standing with our partners across the world. Well, in terms of the pandemic, he has taken pretty significant action to try to do a rollout of the vaccines across the United States, coordinating with what the states and local governments across the country. The U.S. has made a lot of progress, although recently we seem to be getting kind of sticky. What I mean by that, we're starting to get pushback from some people in terms of taking vaccines, pushback from some people in terms of mask wearing, and we're starting to see some spikes in this country again. But I would say he's making progress there too. He passed, with Congress's help, a $1 trillion stimulus bill, which is going to start to take effect gradually, which will help the U.S. economy, which is already growing fairly well at this point. And then three, as I mentioned, he's trying to restore U.S. global standing, which he's making some progress on. But in the United States, he's also trying to work on other initiatives. For example, on infrastructure, on voting rights. These are a whole bunch of issues, along with the environment, of which he needs cooperation from the Republicans under our current sort of electoral system. And it looks like he's kind of getting stuck at this point, which may require him to change tactics over the next few months.
It would also seem fighting climate change is quite a big deal for Biden administration, right? I mean, what's with this burger ban campaign on Fox News? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Well, first off, Joe Biden has addressed climate change a major issue. We know that the United States has re-entered the Paris Environmental Accords. Joe Biden is essentially embracing what's really called sort of the Green New Deal, although he doesn't explicitly say that. He's trying to make the case to the American public and American businesses that by being more environmentally friendly, it'll help produce jobs. He's held an environmental summit, and he's really trying to find a way of making the United States a global leader on environmental issues by making the case for that environmental globalism is also good American business. As part of that, he's trying to tackle some of the biggest sources of pollution and some of the biggest sources of, so let's say, environmental unsustainability or insustainability. And this is the whole burger ban issue here, because we do know, for example, the consumption of meat is very high in the United States. The raising of cattle uses an incredible amount of water, a lot of feed, and so forth. And for many people, the production of meat in the United States raises lots of environmental issues, including, let's say, for global warming issues. And so Fox News is exaggerating the notion of saying that he's trying to ban the burger. But nonetheless, this is part of a broader Biden initiative for us to get us to rethink our lifestyle choices in the United States.
Fox News is probably also talking a lot about how the rich and the wealthy should be worried now, that the Biden's team has presented a plan to hike taxes, not only for corporations, but also for just healthy households. This is quite controversial, isn't it, in the United States? What is Biden offering, and what's the pushback against it?
Well, what Biden is wanting to do at this point is to tax corporations, especially corporations who have offshored and have escaped U.S. taxes. There are estimates, for example, that way in excess of $2 trillion US is being hidden in offshore accounts from corporations trying to escape taxes in the United States. He's proposing that what? That we close some of those loopholes to try to capture some of that money for taxation. He's arguing that corporations have really gotten a significant break in the United States, not just during the Trump era, but take us back nearly 50 years ago, 40 years ago, during the Reagan era, where we dramatically cut corporate tax rates in the United States to levels that now are the lowest they've been probably in nearly a century. So he's proposing that corporations which have money should pay for the costs of global warming, pay for the social security net, social welfare net. And at the same time, he's also arguing that the wealthy who have also done exceedingly well, especially since the pandemic, that they be asked to sort of contribute their fair share. So on one level, he's making classic arguments that Democrats have historically argued for, except they haven't pushed these type of taxes, again, in probably a half a century. Clearly, there's the pushback coming from corporate America, coming from the wealthy, but mostly the taxes he's talking about are people making way in excess of 400,000 US dollars per year, and in some cases over $1 million US dollars per year.
These proposals are actually popular amongst the voters, and at least the polls show the favorability ratings of Biden are quite good. It's above 50%, and all that.
Yeah, he is right now, after nearly his first 100 days, he has very high approval ratings. Very good access. And also, you're right, there is strong support among the public for the tax proposals because what? He's made it clear who he wants to tax. I think the pandemic has changed the politics of taxation, where many people are seeing that what? They were losers in the last, let's say year and a half, in terms of how the rich, the Amazons of the Googles of the world have made a lot of money, and mom and pop businesses have been hurt. So I think he's articulating a message that is very populist at this point. But of course, remember, there's enormous pushback coming from the rich and from corporations who don't want to see this. And so this is setting up an interesting confrontation and battle in the United States politically.
Are there any signs, finally, that Biden has been moving left from his supposed centrist positions?
I would say right now that Joe Biden is pushing an agenda that's probably the furthest to the left in the United States we've seen since the 1960s. Now, is Joe Biden's instinct naturally to the left? No, I don't think so. But in many ways, remember, Joe Biden was first elected to office back in the 1970s at an era that was far more liberal and far more to the left than it is now. And in many ways, he's running as a Democrat who was kind of a centrist, let's say left, back in the 1970s. And by today's standards, he looks very far to the left. So a combination of his let's say his historical orientations, as well as the fact that he is being pulled by, I say, the left wing of his party, is moving him in a direction that I think is surprising many of us.
Užsienio politikos tyrimų instituto Eurazijos programos direktorius Chrisas Milleris sako, kad Jungtinėse valstijose epidemiologinė padėtis pagerėjo, ekonomika atsigauna, o tai leidžia sakyti, kad Amerika sugrįžo. Tačiau užsienio politikoje Bideno laukia iššūkiai.
One is a perception in many countries that the U.S. has had a chaotic response to the pandemic, and more generally that U.S. power is declining on the world stage. And second, relatedly, is the challenge of keeping up all of America's existing commitments and priorities while also dealing with a rising China. And these are two issues that the Biden administration has identified as priorities for dealing with, but it's still too soon to tell whether they'll succeed in addressing both issues.
And what's your take on Biden administration response to recent Ukrainian crisis? Was he tough on Russia?
Well, I think the administration tried what they would describe as a balanced approach. In their view, the sanctions that were imposed on Russia 2 weeks ago were intended as a stick to punish Russia, but at the same time, the offer of a summit was certainly viewed in Moscow as a carrot, a benefit for the Russian government. It seems quite plausible that the Russian government's goal in massing forces along the Ukrainian border was in part to elicit a summit and to start a conversation with the Biden administration. And so in that sense, it seems like the Russian government has achieved its goals of forcing Biden to take it seriously. The key challenge in U.S.-Russian relations is that the U.S. doesn't really want to have to think about Russia. It's got its hands full at home, and its number one foreign policy priority is China. But the Russian government is unwilling to let Biden ignore it, and it has plenty of tools, including its military, to force Washington to take Russia seriously.
As an expert, do you consider this offer of a summit as a concession to Putin?
Well, certainly it achieves a goal of the Putin administration, which is to get itself on the Biden administration's radar screen. Now, conversations themselves aren't necessarily that substantive. We'll have to see what, if anything, comes out of it. And I think it's difficult to imagine too much of substance emerging from the summit simply because the two parties remain very far apart on most of the key issues, from the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Syria, cyber operations, and many others. But it's certainly the case that the Putin administration wants a line of communication with the Biden administration. It wants Biden to have to devote attention to Russia. And in that sense, the Kremlin is certainly getting what it wants. Now, on the opposite side of that, the Kremlin is also having to deal with the reality that the Biden administration is trying to repair ties with European allies, especially in Western Europe, Germany above all, but that's true across Europe. And it does seem to be the case that Russia will confront a more united transatlantic alliance under this administration than it faced under the previous administration. And the Biden administration is betting that the increase in transatlantic unity will be enough to put additional pressure on Russia and force Russia to offer some concessions, although thus far it isn't clear whether that's working.
And what do the first 100 days say about Biden's administration policy toward China?
Well, the Biden administration has pursued a fairly tough line against China, in some ways continuing the China policy of the previous administration. There's been bipartisan agreement in the United States and Congress and more generally that China is a key foreign policy challenge. And the Biden administration has been well within this bipartisan consensus, treating relations with China primarily as a question of competition, with areas of cooperation being very clearly delineated on topics such as climate, but not at all detracting from the sense of needing to compete with China in the Indo-Pacific region and more globally when it comes to issues of international governance. I think the key question on the China front for the Biden administration is actually not in the bilateral relationship, but rather with allies. To what extent can the Biden administration bring together European allies and also allies in Asia like Japan to work together collectively on some of the key challenges: technology, trade, economic issues? There's been a lot of talk about collaboration with allies, but thus far, these conversations are in their early stages. And for both the US and for Europe, providing some substance to these conversations is going to be a fundamental challenge over the next couple of years.
And are the US shifting its attention and resources from other parts of the world to Asia, as some predicted?
Well, I think we've seen this trend happening for some time, dating even before the Trump administration to the Obama administration, who had his policy of rebalancing to the Indo-Pacific. This is visible to a certain extent in military deployments. It's visible to some extent in terms of where U.S. diplomats are spending their time, but I wouldn't really interpret this as abandoning other regions of the world. Certainly in Europe, the Biden administration has been very vocal in reiterating its commitment to European allies and to working with Europe on issues in Asia. And so in that sense, I actually think the Biden administration is really trying to see its alliance system in trilateral terms, bringing together European and Asian allies to work collectively on shared challenges.
And do you see any continuation of President Trump's foreign policy, and will that change?
I think there are a number of issues where the administration is representing continuity. There are obviously a lot of differences as well. Key areas of continuity include the focus on China and the view that China is a strategic competitor. also a desire to extract the United States from conflicts in the Middle East, which President Trump talked about. He didn't fully achieve his goals, but certainly that conversation continues. You can look at Biden's promises to withdraw from Afghanistan in some ways as a continuation of what President Trump tried to do. So when you look at the Middle East, look at Asia, there's a lot of continuity. And in Europe, slightly less so. Trump himself had a confused policy on Russia with, he would say one thing, his administration would say something different. And here I think we see a lot more clarity from the administration as to what it is they're actually trying to accomplish in Europe and on Russia in particular.
Šį kartą laidoje Kompasas tiek.
Iki kitų kartų.